Hi everyone, welcome to this week. We're learning relative pronouns. So we'll talk about them in English and we'll take a look at them in Latin. All right, so this is kind of a brief introduction to both English and Latin, and really what we're dealing with is the W words in English: who, which, all right, whose. All right, now I'm going to get rid of these. In my world, at least, they're not technically relative pronouns, they're more adverbial. And the other one we're going to add into these W's is whom, which is just a variation on who. But we'll talk about that as we get to it. All right, and on the right here, you can see the Latin forms, okay? On the one hand, these are new forms and need to be memorized. On the other hand, they are based on forms that we already know. So if you look at the plural, basically you just have a stem of QU, and then mostly 2 and 2 endings, with the dative and ablative plural being an exception. And then at the top, a little funkier, but following roughly the pattern of hic, hic, hoc, ele, ala, alud. So you can see that IUS in the genitive, that I in the dative, things like that. Okay, and what a relative pronoun does is it introduces a relative clause. All right, and if you remember way back when we talked about clauses are groups of words that have a verb, right? So they have a subject and a verb. Sentences are clauses. Not all clauses are sentences, right? All sentences are clauses. Not all clauses are sentences. One of those. So if I say, the boy who ran home fell, right? So the boy fell, that's a bad color. The boy fell is my main sentence, right? That's a sentence on its own. Okay, who ran home, right? That's a clause. It's got a verb. It's got a subject. But it's not a sentence. It can't stand by itself. Okay, and then in terms of the relative pronoun, so the relative pronoun who introduces the relative clause, right? And in this case, it is functioning as the subject of the verb. Now, relative pronouns are no different in many ways from regular pronouns. If I say the boy fell, all right, we saw him. Him, the pronoun, refers to the boy, of course. It's called the pronoun's antecedent. It's how we know what the pronoun refers to. The relative pronoun will have an antecedent as well. In this case, it is also the boy. Relative pronouns will be relatively close to their antecedents, usually right next to them. They're not always. And then, of course, they've also got grammar for their specific clause. So just like a regular pronoun, they look back to their antecedent, but they also have their own case, their own function in whatever sentence or clause they're existing. All right, and here the Latin forms is kind of laid out a little bigger and a little more clearly. I'm not going to go over them again. I already did. And on the right, you can kind of read various things about them. Okay, so relative pronouns and word order. I'm not going to read through all this, but I will sort of give you the highlights. Relative pronouns and interrogative pronouns, which we'll learn later, those are the same kinds of words but used in questions. They are somewhat unique in English because they are the only time in English where word order does not indicate grammatical function. Okay, what I mean by that is if I say, the boy sees the girl, right? The boy comes first, it's the subject, the girl comes after the verb, she's the direct object. If I flip those around, the girl sees the boy, all right, I've now changed the meaning of the sentence. Now, the girl is seeing the boy instead of the boy seeing the girl. Word order in English oftentimes, most times, equals function. With relative pronouns, the relative pronoun will always go at the beginning of its clause. As we saw in the previous example, who ran home, right? That W word's at the beginning of its clause. Now, when that W word is the subject, that makes life easy because we're used to the subject being at the beginning of its clause. Unfortunately, even when it's the direct object, it will be at the beginning of its clause, and that's where our English brains start to struggle, a little bit. So if we look down here, all right, the girl loves Latin, her teacher admires her. All right, so her, right, antecedent is girl. Okay, so same sentence below, but with a relative pronoun. The girl, all right, whom her teacher admires. So whom is still referring to girl. All right, note that they're both accusative, or that M indicates the accusative, or in English we'd call it the objective. All right, the problem is, though, because it's a relative pronoun, that whom goes at the beginning of the clause, even though it's the direct object, and even though that would go towards the end or after the verb in a normal sentence, as it does in the example above. Okay, so that's just something to sort of get used to, and we'll talk about some tips for how to handle that as we go through. All right, and just a more explication of that. All right, and again, you can sort of read through that. Now, here is kind of that version in Latin. Get my color back. There we go. All right, so there's quem. Quem is the accusative, if you remember. Okay, and a good rule in English, it's not going to work every time, but a good rule in English is that when you're dealing with a non-nominative relative pronoun, in this case an accusative, that relative pronoun should be followed directly by a noun in English. Right, so whom the girl sees. The girl sees her, or him, I guess in this case. We switch it around a little bit. If it's a nominative relative pronoun, the relative pronoun, the W word, will be followed by the verb directly. Okay, so the boy who ran home, right? That's our subject, followed by the verb directly. All right, so you've got to make sure to remember that if you have an accusative relative pronoun, like you do here in quem, when you're translating it, you have a noun coming directly after it. And in this case, at least, it works out because it goes right as the English would. So, excuse me, there we go, whom the girl sees. All right, what a lot of students will do is they'll kind of revert to the nominative for this. They'll say, like, who is seen by the girl, or who sees the girl, right? Girl can't be the accusative because it's not an accusative ending. All right, so you've got to kind of slow yourself down, remember or note that this is accusative, remember the rule about having a noun coming right after that accusative, all right, and then going into your sentence as you would normally. So, whom the girl sees. And this paragraph just kind of lays that out in paragraph form. So you can read that. I'm not going to read it for you again. All right, so here's a little exercise, okay? Just a reminder. All right, so if you remember, adjectives agree in gender, number, and case. Okay, now we're not dealing with adjectives here, we're dealing with pronouns. So pronouns agree in gender and number only. All right, they do not agree in case because that would restrict too much the function of the pronoun in the next clause. Okay, so remember, adjectives, gender, number, case, but we're not dealing with that here. Pronouns agree in just gender, number. That's not to say they can't have the same case. They might coincidentally both be subjects, the pronoun and its antecedent. They might coincidentally be direct objects, but they don't have to have the same case. So in other words, you're just looking for gender and number. So what you're doing here, all right, which of these pronouns on the right agrees with the noun on the left? So, of course, the process is you got to find the gender and number of the noun, and then find the pronoun that fits that as well. Make sure to look up the definitions and or the genders. So uxor means wife. So it is feminine, and of course that em makes it singular. So which of these three is feminine and singular? Okay, cuius can be feminine and singular. It can be genitive of any gender, singular. All right, quam is plural, quibus is plural. All right, so those can't agree. All right, and so cuius is my answer. All right, let's skip down to number 3. All right, so anos is, sorry, I almost wrote the wrong thing. Anos is masculine, and it is plural. All right, so which is masculine plural? So this is masculine, but it's singular, so it can't be quem. This is masculine plural. Let's just make sure qui is any gender, all 3 genders, but singular, so it can't be that, and so qui is my answer. All right, so I included the answers here, all the answers, so pause if you want to, but they are. All right. All right, actually, it looks like I only did it for the first 4. Okay, so here's a relative, pronoun in action. This is from Duquesne University, which is in Pittsburgh. All right, and you can see spiritus est qui vivificat. All right, so it is the spirit, all right, which creates life. All right, so a couple things going on. So first of all, qui's antecedent is spiritus. It's really the only other noun in the sentence. Remember that Latin uses grammatical gender. All right. So spirit in English probably is a neuter noun. I suppose you could make it a masculine or a feminine noun. I translate it as neuter. But you got to use the appropriate pronoun in English. So, of course, if I'm translating it as a neuter, right, I would say which, even though qui isn't neuter in Latin. That's that transfer between languages. All right, qui is the nominative, so it's our nominative singular. Spiritus is nominative singular. All right, and so qui is the subject of this verb vivificat, which means to give life or to create life. So it is the spirit which, qui, all right, gives or creates life. All right, so here you are just choosing translations for these fragments. All right, and really what we're focusing on is that accusative versus nominative relative pronoun. So this is that idea where if the Latin pronoun is accusative, you have to make sure to translate a noun right after it. So if we look at number 1, quam frangunt, all right, is quam nominative or is quam accusative? Quam's accusative. So if it's accusative, it means you're going to have a noun, or in this case, a pronoun, right after it. You'll note in the first example here, so here's your relative pronoun. It goes right to a verb. All right, that's translating it as a nominative, which it is not. That cannot be correct. All right, note here, there's our relative pronoun. Here's our pronoun, our subject pronoun right after it. Okay, Troy, which they wreck. All right, so that is going to be correct because it keeps that quam as an accusative. Conversely, in number 2, all right, qui is nominative. All right, so we are going to have a verb come right after that because it is nominative, and that's how those nominatives work. So in this first one, all right, which he burns, followed by a pronoun in this case, a noun or pronoun. So that's translating the pronoun, the relative pronoun, as accusative. Cannot be correct. All right, so which burns, all right, verb right after it. That's what we want for our nominative. All right, and that is correct. All right, same thing. If you want to pause, do it now. All right, so this is sort of the same thing. Excuse me, but going English to Latin. All right, so you've just got the antecedent and then a fragment of a relative clause. But here, the battle line, which the sister sees. So what you've got to note first and foremost is what's your relative pronoun? Of course, it's which. And then is it followed by a verb or another noun or pronoun? In this case, it's followed by another noun or pronoun, the sister. So does that make it nominative or does that make it accusative? Does that make the relative pronoun nominative or accusative? And of course, it makes it accusative because it's followed directly by that noun. All right. So I need the accusative relative pronoun, which is in this first one. Quam is accusative. So that is going to be correct. So the battle line, acies quam sor cernet, which the sister sees, which my sister sees. Excuse me. In the second choice, qui is nominative, right? So if you were to translate it, it would be the battle line, which sees my sister, which of course it is not the case. All right, number 3, we'll skip to number 3. A slight variation but the same idea. All right, to whom. So relative pronouns will work the same as any other pronoun in terms of case or any other noun. So with that to, you're going to be dealing with the dative. So you want to find a dative, all right, in this first choice. All right, of course, you don't have a dative. It's just a nominative, so that's not correct. Qui's our dative there, so this is going to be correct. All right, same deal. If you want to pause, do it now. All right, and there you go. All right, so here are this week's summatives. All right, so similar to what we've been doing. All right, so you're kind of completing the sentence, choosing these relative pronouns. So really what you're doing is you got 3 different relative pronouns. You've got to match them up with the antecedent. So in other words, with qui, all right, I need a masculine antecedent. So it's going to go with viro. And now I'm going to translate epistulam viro, qui ad regem venit, dati. So kind of the 2 sentences together. All right, quam is going to have to go with epistulam. All right, same kind of thing. And then quem, you can kind of put with viro. You can maybe assume that the speaker is a masculine, whichever kind of works, and then translate them that way. All right, and in the writing, you're just translating the relative pronouns into Latin, okay? Not the whole sentence is just these relative pronouns. All right, so let's do number 2 because it's a little trickier. All right, so we left the city in which many people were working. All right, so the in kind of is part of this. We've got to take account for that, I should say. It's going to be an ablative or likely an ablative, but we've got to make sure we know which kind of ablative so we know how it works. So with city, all right, which is really the city, so it's in the city, so that's going to be my ablative place where, so it is going to use a preposition. So in quo, all right, and then multi homines, all right, laborabant, all right. All right, I will leave the rest to you. That's it for this week. Please be in touch if you have any questions, and I will be here next week. Thanks.